A lonely farmer with 2 children welcomes an 18-year-old virgin. The outcome shocks everyone. The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet village, spilling golden light across the wide fields that stretched beyond the farmhouse. Daniel, a tall, weathered man in his late 30s, was already awake, leaning against the wooden fence as he watched the horizon. His hands were rough and calloused from years of hard labor, and there were lines of worry etched deeply into his face. Life had not been easy for him since the death of his wife, and now, with 2 young children depending on him, every day was a challenge. Inside the farmhouse, the smell of porridge and fresh bread lingered in the air. Lily, his 10-year-old daughter, was still asleep under her warm blanket, her small fingers curled around her stuffed rabbit. Ethan, her 7-year-old brother, had woken earlier and was sitting by the window, tracing shapes on the glass with his tiny finger. Daniel's heart ached every time he looked at them. They were bright, lively children, but they carried a weight beyond their years. Their mother's absence left an emptiness that no amount of love could completely fill. Daniel shook off the thoughts and turned to his morning chores. He fed the chickens, milked the cows, and checked on the small vegetable garden behind the farmhouse. Each task required effort, yet Daniel found comfort in the routine. The rhythm of the farm kept him grounded, even if it could not heal the loneliness he felt. Still, as he worked, he could not ignore the struggles he faced. Money was tight, the crops had been poor the past 2 seasons, and the small farm barely sustained them. The village often whispered about him, questioning why a widowed man with children would struggle to keep his land alive while other families thrived. That afternoon, as Daniel repaired a broken fence, a quiet murmur reached his ears from the edge of the field. A young woman, barely out of her teenage years, was approaching. She walked slowly, carrying a small bag over her shoulder. Her clothes were simple, worn from travel, and her eyes held a mixture of fear and hope. Daniel stopped and squinted against the sun. He had heard rumors in the village of a young woman seeking work, someone who had left a difficult home in search of a fresh start. He had not expected her to come here, to his farm, of all places. The children were the first to notice her. Lily peeked out of the window and gasped softly, pointing toward the figure in the field. "Ethan, look, someone is coming," she whispered excitedly. Ethan followed her gaze, his eyes wide. Daniel's heart quickened. He had not anticipated visitors, especially not anyone who might disrupt their carefully managed routine. The young woman approached slowly, her gaze fixed on the ground. When she reached the farmhouse, she looked up and offered a small, timid smile. "Hello, my name is Emma," she said softly, her voice almost too quiet to hear over the wind. "I heard someone here might need help. I can work for food and a place to stay." Daniel studied her carefully. She looked young, innocent in a way that reminded him painfully of his own children. He knew the villagers would gossip if they found out he allowed a stranger, especially a young woman, to live in his home. The thought made him hesitate, but the earnestness in her eyes made it impossible to turn her away outright. Inside, Lily and Ethan pressed themselves against the window, eager to see who had come. "Papa, can she stay?" Lily asked, her voice full of hope. Ethan nodded eagerly. "Please, Papa, she looks nice. She can help us." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew it would be a difficult adjustment. Having a stranger in the house meant changing routines, sharing space, and facing possible judgment from the neighbors. Yet something about Emma seemed genuine, and the children's excitement was hard to resist. "All right," he said finally, his voice firm but gentle. "She can stay for a while, but we will have rules. Everyone here must respect the house and each other." Emma's face lit up with a shy smile. She nodded, relieved. "Thank you, sir. I promise I will work hard and follow the rules." Over the next few days, Emma settled into the farmhouse. Her presence brought a quiet warmth that had been missing for years. She was careful, respectful, and eager to learn, taking on chores with surprising skill for someone who had never worked on a farm before. She swept the floors, helped prepare meals, and even took time to read stories to Lily and Ethan before bed. The children adored her, laughing at her clumsy attempts to milk the cows and cheering her on when she managed to plant seeds in straight rows for the first time. Daniel watched these moments with a mixture of pride and caution. He could see the bond forming between the children and Emma, but he worried about his own feelings. He had not opened his heart to anyone since the loss of his wife. The idea of caring for another adult in his life again was both comforting and frightening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Daniel found himself sitting on the porch with Emma. The children were inside, playing quietly, and the farmhouse was peaceful. "You've done well these past few days," Daniel said, his voice low. "The kids, they like you. I appreciate your help." Emma blushed, looking down at her hands. "Thank you, sir. I want to belong somewhere. I've never had a place to call home before." "Your farm, your family, it feels safe." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so many nights worrying about how he would manage, yet here was someone who had walked into their lives and quietly made it better. "It's not always easy here," he said carefully. "Life on the farm is hard and people can be unkind. You'll need to be strong." "I can be strong," Emma replied softly. "I've had to be, even when it's been scary." As the days turned into weeks, Emma became an integral part of the household. She helped tend the crops, repaired fences alongside Daniel, and even found ways to entertain the children when work was done. Her laughter filled the house, echoing through the rooms like sunlight. The children's smiles returned, brighter than they had been in years, and Daniel began to notice a lightness in his own steps that he had forgotten existed. However, the village's curiosity did not fade. Neighbors whispered when they saw Emma at the farmhouse, wondering why she was there, questioning her intentions, and casting judgment on Daniel for welcoming her. Daniel tried to ignore it, focusing on the safety and happiness of his children, but the gossip sometimes stung, a reminder that the outside world could be harsh and unforgiving. One evening, after a long day in the fields, Daniel returned to find Emma sitting on the porch, humming a soft tune as she stitched a tear in Ethan's shirt. He paused, watching her, amazed at how naturally she had become part of their lives. "You've done a lot for us," he said quietly, not wanting to disturb the calm evening. Emma looked up and smiled gently. "I'm glad I can help. I like being here. It feels like I finally have a place." Daniel nodded, feeling a strange warmth he had not felt in years. He realized that while the challenges of running the farm and raising two children alone were immense, having someone like Emma made the struggle lighter. He could not predict what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope. As night fell, the farmhouse glowed softly with lamplight. Lily and Ethan were asleep in their beds, dreaming peacefully for once. Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on the changes in their home. The arrival of a young woman, timid and uncertain, had shifted the balance of their lives in ways he could not have imagined. There was laughter, warmth, and hope now, a sense that perhaps their small family could endure and even thrive. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the fields and the promise of new beginnings. Daniel knew that challenges lay ahead, that the villagers' gossip would not stop, and that Emma's presence would test his patience and judgment. But for now, he allowed himself to savor the calm, the quiet joy, and the simple truth that they were no longer entirely alone. The sun rose the next morning, spilling light across the farmhouse once more. Daniel watched as Lily and Ethan ran through the yard, laughing as Emma chased them with mock seriousness, her laughter echoing through the fields. In that moment, Daniel felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Life was not perfect, and it never would be. But with courage, love, and a little help from someone who cared, even the loneliest farmer and his children could find happiness in the most unexpected places. And so, the farmhouse, once quiet and heavy with sorrow, began to fill with life again, as the rhythm of work, laughter, and small joys carried them forward into the uncertain days ahead. The days at the farm began to settle into a gentle rhythm. Daniel woke with the sun, tending to the cows, feeding the chickens, and working in the small vegetable garden, while Lily and Ethan busied themselves with small chores and play. Emma, now a familiar presence, moved through the house with quiet efficiency, her hands always busy, her voice soft and kind. She cooked the meals, cleaned the rooms, and even helped the children with their reading. Slowly, she was weaving herself into the fabric of their lives, not as a guest, but as a part of their little family. At first, Daniel had been cautious, keeping a careful distance. He watched Emma carefully, noting her gentle ways with the children, her willingness to work long hours, and her quiet courage. She had never lived on a farm before, yet she learned quickly, listening to his instructions, asking questions when she did not understand, and always doing her best. It was clear that she had faced hardships before, that life had demanded strength from her even in her young years. But despite her quiet determination, there was a softness in her eyes, a vulnerability that Daniel could not ignore. The children, on the other hand, were enchanted by her. Lily would run to her side, asking for stories of distant places, of adventures she had never experienced, and Emma would oblige, her imagination bringing the tales to life. Ethan, a quiet boy with an insatiable curiosity, would follow her around the yard, learning to feed the animals and water the plants. Daniel watched these moments with a mixture of relief and amazement. For the first time in years, the children were smiling freely, their laughter ringing through the farmhouse like music. One afternoon, as the sun beat down on the fields, Daniel and Emma were repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged in the previous week's storm. They worked side by side, hammering nails and tying loose posts with rope. The children played nearby, chasing each other and gathering wildflowers. The air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and grass, mingling with the sound of birds singing in the trees. "You've gotten good at this," Daniel said, glancing at Emma as she lifted a heavy post with surprising strength. Emma smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. "I've never done it before, but I want to help. I want to be useful." Daniel nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had not expected to feel this way about someone outside his family for a long time, but Emma's presence was changing that. She was not just helpful, she was patient, kind, and steady, qualities he had almost forgotten existed. Despite the calm at the farm, the village continued to watch and whisper. Daniel could sense the curious eyes on the farmhouse whenever he went into town to buy supplies. Some neighbors nodded politely, but others whispered to each other, shaking their heads at the sight of a young woman living with a widowed man and his children. Daniel tried to ignore them, focusing on the farm and his family, but the judgment lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder that the world outside their little home was not entirely kind. One evening, as the family gathered around the small wooden table for supper, Lily spoke up, her voice full of excitement. "Papa, Emma taught me how to plant carrots today, and Ethan helped too. Isn't it wonderful?" Daniel smiled, looking at his children's bright eyes. "That's great," he said warmly. "You're learning a lot. I'm proud of both of you." Emma, sitting quietly beside them, added softly, "You're both doing so well. The farm needs careful hands and you're giving it that." Ethan beamed, his small face lighting up with pride. "Emma says I'm good at feeding the chickens," he said proudly. Daniel chuckled. "Well, she's right. You are good at it. But remember, the cows need you too." These simple moments, filled with laughter and gentle teasing, became the new normal at the farmhouse. Daniel began to feel a sense of relief he had not known for years. The house was no longer quiet, heavy with the absence of his wife. It was alive, filled with energy, care, and warmth. Yet the harmony of the farm was tested one morning when a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds filled the sky, heavy winds bent the trees, and rain began to fall in thick sheets. Daniel rushed outside to secure the animals, Emma following closely behind him. The children watched from the porch, wide-eyed and worried. "Be careful, Papa," Lily shouted over the roar of the wind. "I will, darling. Stay inside," Daniel called back, trying to keep his voice steady even as the wind threatened to knock him off balance. Emma helped guide the cows into the barn, tying them securely while Daniel secured the doors and windows. The storm grew stronger, lashing the farmhouse and barn with rain and wind. For a moment, Daniel feared the worst. The barn, old and weathered, creaked ominously as the wind tore at its wooden beams. "Hold the doors," Daniel shouted, as Emma braced herself against the wind, gripping the handles tightly. The storm seemed endless, but together they managed to secure the animals and minimize damage to the barn. By the time the rain began to subside, both were soaked to the bone, their clothes clinging to their bodies. They looked at each other and laughed, a sound of relief and shared accomplishment. "You're stronger than I thought," Daniel said, shaking his head in amazement. Emma smiled, shivering slightly. "And you're braver than I imagined. Thank you for trusting me." In the aftermath of the storm, the villagers could not ignore the events at the farm. Word spread quickly that the widowed farmer and the young woman had worked together to save the animals during the storm. Whispers of admiration replaced some of the earlier judgment. Some neighbors came by to offer help, impressed by Emma's courage and Daniel's dedication. The bond between Daniel and Emma grew stronger as they continued to face daily challenges together. He began to rely on her not just for help with the farm, but for companionship, guidance, and emotional support. She had a quiet wisdom beyond her years, a calm that steadied his nerves and soothed his worries. One afternoon, as they rested under the shade of a large oak tree after a long day of work, Daniel found himself opening up in a way he had not done for years. "It's strange," he admitted, "how much easier life feels with you here. I didn't realize how lonely we were before." Emma listened quietly, her eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes it takes someone new to see what we've been missing," she said gently. "You have a wonderful family, Daniel. The children are amazing, and you care so much." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so many nights worrying about the farm, about money, about survival. He had not considered that his own heart needed care too. Emma's words made him realize how much he had been missing. Not just the love of a partner, but the warmth of someone who truly understood and shared the burden of life. As the weeks passed, the children continued to grow attached to Emma. Lily would often follow her around the garden, asking endless questions, while Ethan began to mimic her careful ways with the animals. Daniel noticed the change in them and in himself. He no longer felt the constant weight of exhaustion and worry. There was a lightness, a sense of hope that had been absent for far too long. Yet the story of the farm was not without tension. Some villagers continued to gossip, whispering about the unusual arrangement. Daniel tried to ignore them, but he could not stop the occasional glance of disapproval or the sideways comments made when he went to town. Emma, however, never faltered. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never engaging in the gossip, always focusing on her work and the well-being of the children. Her resilience inspired Daniel, teaching him to rise above judgment and concentrate on what truly mattered. One evening, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Lily asked Emma to tell a story about her childhood. Emma hesitated at first, then smiled softly, sharing memories of her own struggles and how she had learned to care for herself despite difficulties. The children listened intently, and Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on how far they had all come. Life at the farmhouse was no longer a struggle defined solely by labor and survival. It had transformed into something more, hopeful, vibrant, and full of connection. Daniel began to imagine a future where the children could grow up surrounded by love and stability, where Emma could remain a part of their lives, and where they could face challenges together as a family. As night fell, Daniel looked out over the fields, the stars beginning to twinkle in the dark sky. He felt a sense of peace he had not known for years. The storm had tested them, the village had watched, and life had continued to challenge them in countless ways. But together, with Emma by their side, Daniel and his children were no longer alone. They had found a strength and joy that could withstand judgment, gossip, and hardship. The farmhouse, once quiet and lonely, now echoed with laughter, conversation, and the simple sounds of life. And Daniel, standing quietly in the moonlight, realized that perhaps this unexpected visitor, timid and inexperienced though she was, had brought with her the very thing his family had been missing all along: hope, companionship, and the beginning of a new life. The morning after the storm was calm, but the damage it had left behind was obvious. The barn's roof had been torn in places, a few fence posts were broken, and the muddy fields were littered with fallen branches. Daniel stepped outside, surveying the mess with a tired frown. His hands were already sore from the previous day's work, and he knew there was much to fix before the animals could be fully safe again. Emma appeared at his side, carrying a basket of eggs she had collected from the chickens that had huddled safely in the coop. "We'll get through this," she said softly, brushing wet hair from her forehead. "It will take time, but we can manage together." Daniel nodded, grateful for her presence. He had faced storms before, but this one felt different. It was as if life itself was testing their small family, forcing them to work harder and rely on one another more than ever. The children joined them soon after, their small hands eager to help clear the debris. Lily carried twigs to the compost pile, while Ethan dragged broken boards to a corner, his tiny muscles straining. The work was exhausting, but the air was filled with a quiet energy. Daniel watched Emma coordinate the children with patience and care, and he felt a growing admiration for her. She had never lived on a farm before, yet she approached every challenge with determination and grace. Even when branches fell unexpectedly or a fence post refused to stay upright, she never lost her composure. By midday, the barn had been patched enough to house the animals safely, though it was far from perfect. The cows mooed softly as Daniel guided them inside, and the chickens clucked contentedly, glad for the return of shelter. Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow, taking a moment to breathe. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of accomplishment, tempered by exhaustion. As the family sat down to a modest lunch of bread, cheese, and fresh vegetables, the quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of voices in the distance. Peering through the window, Daniel saw a few villagers approaching the farmhouse. He recognized some of them, neighbors who had often whispered judgment, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Emma noticed his tense expression and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "I'll handle them," she whispered, smiling reassuringly. The villagers arrived at the porch, offering polite greetings and awkward smiles. "We heard about the storm," one man said cautiously. "Thought we'd check to see if you needed any help." Daniel nodded, appreciating the gesture even as he felt the weight of their scrutiny. "Thank you," he replied. "We've managed so far, but your concern is kind." Emma stepped forward, speaking with calm confidence. "We're doing well, thanks. The children help too, and we work together. The farm is safe." The villagers exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her composure and maturity. Some nodded in approval, others remained skeptical, but none could deny the clear bond forming in that little farmhouse. Emma's presence, gentle yet capable, was slowly changing the way the village viewed Daniel and his family. Later that evening, after the visitors had left, Daniel sat with Emma on the porch, the children asleep inside. The air was cool and the stars shone brightly above the fields. "They're slowly seeing things differently," Daniel said thoughtfully. "But I worry, what will they think next? There's always someone ready to judge, to assume the worst." Emma leaned against him lightly. Let them think what they will. You know the truth. The children are happy, the farm is safe, and we care for one another. That's what matters." Daniel nodded, feeling a rare sense of peace. Yet beneath the calm, a subtle tension lingered. He could not ignore the reality that their unconventional household would always draw attention, and that challenges, both external and internal, were likely to come. The next weeks were filled with hard work and quiet moments of connection. Emma proved to be invaluable, her willingness to learn and adapt making her an essential part of the household. She tended the animals, repaired fences, and even assisted Daniel with bookkeeping, learning quickly how to manage the small farm's meager finances. The children thrived under her care, their laughter and curiosity returning to the house in full measure. Despite the progress, Daniel felt a growing awareness of his own emotions. He found himself looking for Emma during the day, feeling a sense of relief whenever she was nearby. He noticed her small gestures, the way she smiled at the children, the careful way she handled the animals, and the quiet patience she showed even in difficult moments. It was a warmth he had not felt in years, a gentle tug at his heart that both comforted and frightened him. One evening, after a long day repairing fences, Daniel and Emma sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "Emma," he began cautiously, "I need to ask you something. You've become such an important part of our lives. I just want to know, are you happy here?" Emma looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I am," she said softly. "I've never had a place to belong before. I've never had people who cared for me, not really, but here, with you and the children, I feel like I finally belong." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had been so careful to protect his own heart, to guard against loss and disappointment, yet Emma's words touched something deep inside him. "I'm glad you feel that way," he said quietly, "because we're lucky to have you too." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter from the children. Peering inside, they saw Lily and Ethan playing quietly, their faces glowing with happiness. Daniel realized that the presence of Emma had transformed more than just their daily routines. She had brought back a sense of life and joy that had been missing for years. Yet, the village's judgment continued to linger. Even as some neighbors offered assistance or words of approval, others whispered behind closed doors. Daniel was aware of their scrutiny, but he chose to focus on what truly mattered: the well-being of his children and the bond forming within his home. Emma, with her quiet strength and kindness, had taught him to rise above the judgment of others, to value truth and love over gossip and opinion. One afternoon, a letter arrived for Emma, brought by a traveling courier. She opened it hesitantly, her face shifting from curiosity to surprise. It was an offer to study at a nearby town school, a chance for her to pursue education and opportunities she had never imagined. Her heart raced as she read the words aloud to Daniel and the children. It's a wonderful opportunity," Emma said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never had a chance like this before." Daniel felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Pride swelled in his chest. He wanted Emma to have every chance at happiness and success, but at the same time, a pang of fear struck him. If she left, the small family they had built together might be broken. The thought of the children losing her, of the house returning to its previous quiet loneliness, was almost unbearable. Lily and Ethan looked at Emma with wide eyes. "Do you have to go?" Lily asked, her voice small and hesitant. Emma knelt beside her, taking her hand gently. "I don't know yet," she said softly. "It's an important decision, but whatever happens, I'll always care for you both." That night, as the family sat by the fireplace, Daniel struggled to find words. He wanted to encourage Emma to follow her dreams, but his own heart was heavy with the thought of losing her. "Emma," he began cautiously, "this is an amazing opportunity. You should consider it. I just don't want to lose the happiness you've brought us." Emma smiled, a mix of gratitude and reassurance in her eyes. "I'll think carefully," she said. I care about this family, Daniel. I care about you and the children. That will not change no matter what I choose." The days that followed were filled with quiet tension. Emma spent time organizing her studies, helping the children, and assisting Daniel with farm work. The bond between them had grown deeper, yet the question of her future loomed over every moment. Daniel felt a strange mixture of pride, fear, and hope. Pride in seeing Emma pursue her dreams, fear of losing the presence that had transformed their lives, and hope that, somehow, they could find a solution that preserved their family. One afternoon, Daniel took a walk through the fields, the children playing nearby. He paused to look at the sun setting over the horizon, its golden light bathing the farmhouse in warmth. He realized that life was full of uncertainty, but it was also full of choices. Emma's presence had brought love, care, and hope back into their lives, and he could not allow fear of change to destroy what they had built. Returning to the farmhouse, he found Emma tending the garden, her hands steady and sure as she worked. He approached quietly, standing beside her without speaking. After a moment she looked up, meeting his gaze. "Thinking?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded. "Always, about everything, but especially about you and the children. I want you to be happy, but I want you here." Emma smiled softly, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll find a way," she said. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the farmhouse glowed with warmth, laughter, and quiet determination. The storm had tested them, village gossip had lingered, and the future remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: their small family was bound by care, trust, and love. And in that moment, Daniel realized that life's true strength lay not in avoiding challenges, but in facing them together, with courage, hope, and those who truly mattered by your side. The morning light filtered softly through the farmhouse windows, painting the wooden floors with streaks of gold. Daniel moved quietly through the rooms, careful not to wake the children too early. Today, however, the farmhouse felt heavier than usual. Emma's letter had arrived days before, offering her a chance to study in the town nearby. A place filled with new opportunities, new people, and a future she had never imagined. Daniel knew that, sooner or later, she would have to make a decision, and the thought filled him with a mixture of pride and dread. Emma was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with the same careful attention she gave to every task. She looked up when Daniel entered, her expression calm but thoughtful. "Morning," she said softly, placing a steaming cup of tea in front of him. "I was thinking, maybe today is the day I should decide." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. "It's a big choice," he said quietly. "Whatever you choose, I'll support you. I just hope it's not too hard for all of us." Emma smiled faintly, her eyes meeting his with a quiet determination. "I've thought about it a lot. I know what this opportunity means, but I also know what this family means to me." The children bounded into the kitchen, Lily with her bright smile and Ethan tugging at Emma's sleeve. "Are you going to stay?" Lily asked innocently, her small hands gripping the edge of the table. Emma knelt down to their level, taking both their hands in hers. "I'm not sure yet," she said gently, "but I promise whatever I decide I will always care for you too. You're very important to me." Lily and Ethan nodded slowly, sensing the seriousness in her voice. Daniel watched the moment unfold, a bittersweet feeling in his chest. The children had come to love Emma as a sister, a mentor, and a friend. Losing her, or even the thought of losing her, was unimaginable. That afternoon, after finishing the morning chores, Daniel and Emma walked together through the fields. The sun was warm on their backs and a gentle breeze rustled the tall grass. For a while neither spoke, both lost in their thoughts. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Emma," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about your decision. I want you to have everything you deserve, but I can't pretend that I wouldn't be happier if you stayed here with us." Emma stopped walking and turned to him, her eyes soft but firm. "Daniel, I want to be honest with you. I've never had a place to belong. I've never had people who truly cared for me, who trusted me and made me feel safe. I feel that here, with you and the children. I can't ignore what this family has given me." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had expected gratitude, maybe hesitation, but hearing her admit how much she cared about them made his heart swell. "So, what are you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma took a deep breath. "I'm saying I want to stay. I don't want to leave. This family, it's my home now." For a moment, Daniel simply stared at her, disbelief mixing with relief and joy. Then he reached out and gently took her hand. "You've made us the happiest we've been in years," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "We'll face the world together, whatever comes." Later that day, Emma made her decision public. She went into the village to speak with the local school authorities who had sent the letter of opportunity. She thanked them sincerely for considering her, but explained that she had chosen to remain with Daniel and the children. Some villagers frowned, others whispered, but many nodded in respect. They could not deny the visible bond and happiness of the family she had joined. Returning home, Emma was greeted with hugs and laughter. Lily and Ethan clung to her tightly, their faces bright with joy. Daniel embraced her, feeling a sense of completeness he had not known since the days before his wife passed. "Welcome home," he said softly, smiling through the tears in his eyes. The days that followed were filled with renewed energy and optimism. The farm, once fragile and struggling, began to thrive with the combined effort of Daniel, Emma, and the children. The barn was repaired, fences strengthened, and the fields carefully tended. Emma's presence brought not only companionship but also new ideas and enthusiasm, making the daily work lighter and more enjoyable. In the evenings, the family would gather by the fireplace, sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. Daniel taught Emma the small intricacies of farm life, while she shared her knowledge of reading and learning, helping the children with lessons that went beyond simple chores. The farmhouse, once quiet and heavy, now resonated with warmth and energy. The villagers, though slow to change, began to notice the transformation. Those who had whispered judgment before now offered assistance and kind words. Emma's courage and dedication, combined with Daniel's steadfast care for his children, slowly won over even the most skeptical neighbors. The family's bond became an example of trust, resilience, and love in the face of adversity. One evening, Daniel and Emma stood on the porch, watching the sunset over the fields. Lily and Ethan played nearby, their laughter carrying through the air. Daniel felt a sense of peace that he had long believed impossible. "Emma," he said softly, "you've given us something I didn't think we'd ever find again: hope, joy, and a family complete." Emma smiled, leaning lightly against him. "And you've given me a home, trust, and a family that cares. I never thought I could belong somewhere like this, but I do now." The children ran toward them, holding handfuls of wildflowers they had picked. "Look, Emma, look, Papa," Lily exclaimed. "We picked flowers for you." Ethan nodded, his face glowing. "Thank you for staying." Daniel laughed, lifting the children into his arms. Emma joined them, gathering a few flowers herself and tucking them into her hair. For a moment they all stood together, the farmhouse glowing behind them, the field stretching wide and free, and the sun painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. Days turned into weeks, and the farm continued to flourish. Daniel found himself less burdened, no longer carrying the weight of loneliness and worry alone. Emma's presence was a constant source of warmth, guidance, and companionship. The children grew stronger, happier, and more confident, their laughter echoing through the house and fields. The story of the small family began to spread throughout the village. What had once been seen as scandalous, a young woman living with a widowed farmer, was now viewed with admiration. People marveled at the dedication, love, and teamwork that had transformed the farmhouse from a place of struggle into a home full of life. One crisp autumn evening, as the harvest was complete and the fields lined with golden crops, Daniel and Emma walked together along the edge of the property. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of soil and harvest, and the sun dipped low in the sky. Daniel looked at Emma, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and wonder. "I never imagined life could be this full," he said softly. "After all we've been through, I feel like we've found something precious." Emma smiled, taking his hand. "We did," she said. "And we'll keep finding it every day together." The children ran ahead, chasing each other and laughing, their joy unburdened and pure. Daniel watched them, feeling a warmth he had not known since before his wife's passing. The farmhouse, once quiet and heavy with sorrow, now thrived with love, laughter, and the steady rhythm of life shared among those who truly cared for one another. As night fell, the family gathered inside, the fire crackling in the hearth. Daniel, Emma, Lily, and Ethan sat together, sharing stories and planning for the future. There was no pretense, no fear of judgment, only the simple, profound satisfaction of belonging and being cared for. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly in the clear night sky. Daniel stepped onto the porch, gazing up at the infinite expanse. He thought of the long journey that had brought them here, the struggles, the storms, the whispered judgments, and the moments of doubt. And yet through it all they had found a way to create a home, a family, and a future full of hope. Emma joined him quietly, slipping her hand into his. "We've come a long way," she said softly. "We have," Daniel agreed, squeezing her hand. "And it's just the beginning." The farmhouse stood quietly behind them, filled with warmth, life, and the certainty that love and family could grow in the most unexpected places. Daniel, Emma, and the children had faced hardship, uncertainty, and judgment, yet they had emerged stronger, united, and deeply connected. And in the quiet of the night, under the watchful eyes of the stars, they knew one simple truth. Together, they could face whatever life had in store, and the happiness they had found would endure, bright and unwavering, for all the days to come.